Hello and welcome again to Straight Talk. In a recent video that related to Essex Police, I talked a lot and effectively exposed their appalling record when it comes to the increase in crime that Essex as a county has seen, and also the unbelievable reduction in detection in solved rates, particularly for the most abhorrent of crimes, particularly sexual crimes, including rape and other sexual assaults, and also violence. It made for pretty grim viewing, I think, in terms of not just the lack of performance by the Chief Constable of Essex and indeed the Police, Fire and Crime Commissioner, Roger Hirst, but particularly at a time when they have decided that their priorities are, for instance, to knock on the door of journalists to try and stop them opinionating on social media. We've also seen in recent weeks and months a real increase, a plethora of rather ill-advised police action when it comes to, for instance, 8 police officers turning up at a producer, funny enough, a Times radio producer's door to try and caution him and indeed then arrest him and his wife for remonstrating against 1 or 2 members of their disabled daughter's school because they didn't like the way that the school was orchestrating the instatement of new senior teachers and management. And rather than that being a question of freedom of speech, the police response was to send several marked police cars and several officers to their home and to incarcerate them in prison cells for 12 hours or more. We've also seen some police forces, apart from being heavy-handed and arresting people for social media posts and for basically having an opinion that might not be as lefty liberal as some senior police officers would like. We've seen an increase in the amount of DEI enthusiasm, shall we call it, particularly some police forces saying that they actually would rather just employ people of an ethnic minority, whether they can speak English or not, as police officers. In other words, white applicants need not apply. So I thought, because my home county of Essex seems to have so much wrong with it in terms of the way that the police force here is run, I thought I'd do some more probing, some more digging. So in fact, that is what I have done. I've submitted several weeks ago a Freedom of Information request relating to Essex Police, and particularly the following things: its performance with regard to the amount of sick days that police officers have, and specifically the amount of sick days in long term that the Essex Police Force has been subjected to. So, in other words, let's be clear, how many police officers are off long-term sick? And also another question I raised was, how much money does Essex Police spend on consultants? Now, you would think with a force of 3,800 police officers, let me just get my numbers clear here, Essex Police, by way of this Freedom of Information request, which found its way to me, even though it was late, about 2 weeks ago, and I'm shooting this on the 20th of May 2025. So Essex Police is made up of 3,815 police officers, 2,200 police staff, 95 PCSOs and 246 part-time specialists. That's a total of 6,432 people. But the number to highlight and to focus on here, of course, is the amount of police officers, 3,815. If you listen to Roger Hirst and read some of the stuff on the Police, Fire and Crime Commissioner's website, he takes a lot of pride and pleasure in talking about how Essex Police now has more police officers than ever before. And indeed, I would tip my hat to that, because of course with a growing population and indeed growing crime, you would think that that would be an obvious thing to do in terms of increasing the number of police officers in Essex. However, we don't tend to see them very often. I mean, I'm quite active in my local town and indeed in the county in terms of driving around, walking around, getting public transport, believe it or not, and I hardly ever see a police officer. You don't see them walking the beat, particularly in the busiest areas of where I live, Brentwood and Shenfield and Chelmsford. You only tend to see them, it seems, after an incident. So once they've been called and they pop up from wherever they're perhaps hiding, and then you see them with blues and twos on, rushing to the latest incident, no doubt to very quickly and enthusiastically give the victim of said crime a crime reference number so that they claim on their insurance. But where the hell are the police? Why aren't they visible? Why are they not walking the beat? Why are they not driving around as a deterrent to baddies and to wrong-uns and to criminals, particularly those that would really do us harm? So those that would commit crimes of a sexual nature, those that commit crime of a violent nature. By the way, since Roger Hirst, the Police and Fire and Crime Commissioner, took office in 2016, I can tell you that the number of crimes against the person has risen by 90%. So as of the latest numbers available, 58,700 violent crimes against the person in the previous 12 months. And that actually against the number that were perpetrated when Mr. Hirst first took office back in May 2016, that was only 30,800. So a 90% increase in violence against the person since Roger Hirst took office. The number of rapes have doubled from 1,020 to 2,078. That's a 103.7% increase. Robbery is up 40%, drug offence is up 98%, weapons possession up 60%, public order offences have almost doubled to 12,000 in the last 12 months, up 88%. And all the while, the detection rate has plummeted. Violence against the person. In May 2016, the detection rate prior to the Police, Fire and Crime Commissioner post being created and taken by Roger Hirst, the violence against the person detection rate was 25.7%. It is now, under his tenure, 12.2%. So that's a reduction in detection, in efficiency, in performance of 52.5%. The rape detection rate, this is frankly disgraceful, was a measly 11% in May 2016. And under Roger Hirst's tenure at his hands in the last 8 years, that detection rate has plummeted 67% to just 3.5%. So in other words, 96.5% of rapes in Essex go undetected. I'll say that again, 96.5% of rapes in Essex go undetected. No one is caught, no one is charged, no one is taken through the judiciary system, no one is imprisoned. Burglary, similar story, 9% detection rate 8 years ago, it's now 6.7%, so a reduction of 23%. And all the while, the amount that the taxpayer pays in what they call the Essex Police and Fire precept, the amount that taxpayers in Essex pay in addition to their standard council tax, has increased significantly. And in fact, again, since Mr. Hirst took office back in 2016, the percentage increases in the council tax precept are as follows. In his first year of service, 2.7%, the next year 2.5%, 1.8%, 1%, 3.8%, and in 2022-2023 he decided that he would put up council tax to the Essex taxpayer insofar as the police and fire element by 11.1%, and then the next year, last year, by 4.6%, which I think was just about the maximum possible. So during that 8-year period, council tax, as far as policing is concerned, has gone up by 28%. So you're paying 28% more for your police service, but crime, particularly when it comes to violence against the person, rape, robbery, drug offences, weapons possession, all those particularly nasty things, those crimes have soared and the detection rate has plummeted. So in effect, you are paying much more to get much less performance out of Essex Police under Mr. Roger Hirst's tenure. But it doesn't end there, and here's the point of this video. I submitted an FOI request several weeks ago. It's come back, as I say, late. And the questions I asked were, for instance, how many sick days have been taken by police officers in the previous 12 months? And also, how many police officers are on long-term sick? So in other words, have been sick not just for a day or two here and there, but for chunks of the year, namely any period over 28 days in length. And I can tell you that the total amount of sick hours, because that's how the police FOI responses come through, the total amount of police hours taken sick in the previous 12 months is 493,705 hours taken sick. So I've done some calculations here. On average, that's 11 days sick per employee. And for police officers, it's the highest of all of the categories. So between police officers, staff, PCSOs and specials, the average police officer takes 11 and a half days sick, in addition to the 25 days holiday. So each police officer is off for about 37 days of the year, which is about 7.5 weeks of every year. So in other words, each police officer does not work, either because they're on holiday or sick, on average for 7.5 weeks. Maybe that explains why, despite having more police officers, that frankly you never see one. And maybe, I mean, I'm just joining the dots here, there is a correlation between lack of police presence and soaring crime in Essex insofar as violence against the person, sexual offences and so on, as per all of the things that I've pointed out. Now, it turns out that there are 412 police officers right now in Essex on long-term sick. So that's 11% of all police officers are currently, as I shoot this, off sick. So the real number of police officers is not 3,815, it's actually 3,815 less 412. So that's about 3,400 police officers, because 11% aren't just off sick with a sniffly nose, they are off sick for the long term. And get this, I hear you shouting at your device there saying, yeah, but of course police officers get injured, you know, maybe that's why they are having so much time off. Well, I asked the question in terms of the amount of police officers that are off sick through mental health, so, you know, depression, anxiety and so on. And actually the number is 60%. So only 40% of police officers are off in the long term through other things, whether that be injury, you know, awful as that is, or, you know, other illnesses. 60% of police officers are off right now of that long-term sick number because of so-called mental health issues. So I think we need to ask ourselves, what on earth is going on at Essex Police? Not only do we have 11% of all police officers off at any one time on long-term sick, the majority of those are off for mental health reasons. And that's at a cost, by the way. This total sickness bill, if you translate it back to, you know, the average salary of a police officer and multiply it up into all of those days that have been taken sick, that's costing the Essex taxpayer currently £16 million a year in sickness costs, or the cost of employing people that are not working because they are sick. So let me know what you think about that in the comments. The fact that you've got this correlation between lack of police officers, an increase in the cost of Essex policing, but also, make no mistake, crime in Essex, particularly those abhorrent crimes of violence, rape and so on. Those crimes are getting worse, and the detection rate, particularly with things as outrageous and hideous and harrowing as rape, the detection rate is pretty much zero. I mentioned earlier on as well that I'd asked about consultants, and often the P&L of a public organisation can be manipulated by way of employing off-book consultants, so they don't hit the employee line. Now, they can be, I guess, consultant detectives, they can be, you know, crime consultants or whomever. I wanted to know, because it's taxpayer money, exactly how many of those are employed. And it turns out from the FOI request that I've eventually received that as many as 18 different consultants are employed within Essex Police. And then the next natural question, of course, for me to ask is, well, what does that cost? In other words, what does it cost us? What does it cost us, the hard-pressed, hard-working Essex taxpayer? And the answer was, we're not telling you. So we have a publicly funded organisation here with a budget, by the way, of £363 million of Essex taxpayers' money. £363 million as a budget every year that is taken from hard-working Essex people. And Essex Police will not tell me, they refused to tell me how much they are spending on consultants. So that is probably, wild guess here, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of pounds. But on what On whom, for what purpose, we don't know. Essex Police is in a mess. Clearly, and you can tell because its priorities are wrong. Its priorities when it comes to, as I've revealed before, the amount of people that it hires for DEI purposes. I revealed that on Talk TV a few weeks ago. Essex Police spends £614,000 a year just on DEI hires. So it's just on people to make sure that they've ticked these big DEI boxes. With that, the long-term sick, the inability and refusal to tell us what they're spending, coupled with the fact that crime in Essex is scary, particularly violence, particularly rape and sexual offences, drug offences and so on. I think Mr. Roger Hirst and the Chief Constable need to answer for this publicly, and I challenge both of them to a conversation, a debate which we will film, to answer some of the questions that I'm raising in these videos as to why they seem to be so inefficient, so incapable. And to be clear, I'm not talking about the rank and file, because obviously they are told to do what they are told to do in terms of senior police officers and the police and crime commissioner. So that's my challenge to Roger Hirst and the Chief Constable. Let's get together and have a conversation about why you're so inept. And frankly, if you can't justify your positions at the head of Essex Police, then clearly I will also then be calling for you to resign. That's it for now. Let me know what you think in terms of this video in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe this channel, please. Until next time.